In today's episode, I get to talk with one of my all-time favorite award-winning authors, Lynne McTaggart. Lynn has been an absolute avatar in the fields of consciousness and human potential, and it's such an honor to sit down and talk with her today. Join us as we learn how to supercharge our powers of manifestation, more deeply understand our interconnectedness in the unified field, and discover just how incredibly powerful your intention actually is. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our series on science, mysticism, and beyond, humanity's next phase of evolution, as we round this series out. So what a wonderful show we got today. We get to talk to Lynne McTaggart, and this is an absolute treat for me because Lynn has been one of my favorite authors for quite some time. And I remember reading her book, The Field, way back in naturopathic medicine, and probably about 20 years ago when I was in my third or fourth year. And her work came out, and it seemed to be around the same sort of time, or at least what I was aware of was when her work came out, and was like, and I started getting into people like Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza, and they often do a lot of work together. And I really love all of their work. I think it's brilliant. And it has so been an important piece of pushing the human potential and what we are actually capable of, and just how important our thoughts and where we hold our gaze, where we focus on, what we focus on, these things dramatically impact our lives. And what I love about this group of people, and Lynn's work particularly, is she really explains how it happens. And then not only explains it, but she runs these massive experiments. I mean, she runs the intention experiment where they've got literally thousands of people collectively intending and then seeing measurable changes in things. So she's really bridging this world of what we think of as sort of spirituality in many cases and the science, and she's really pulled these two things together. So hang tight as we go through everything with her, and we talk about, what's the secret sauce to supercharging your ability to manifest, and learn how group intentions can literally heal your life, and understand more deeply that relationship between the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that we hold, and how those things can dramatically affect our life. So enjoy this episode with her. It's really quite wonderful. And Lynn is going to be back to join us as well at a live event that we are going to have on March 26th, which I believe is going to be 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I believe that is 6 p.m. in London, which is GMT time. And then she's also going to be coming back with us again for a group roundtable discussion with Roland McCready and Dr. Todd Ovokatis and Christiane Northrup and Huna Flash. So it's going to be fun. We're still trying to pull together some of the different questions. And if you have any questions as well for that group, start to post them wherever you see the poster on our social media or the YouTube videos for Lynn. When you know that we're going to have these events, just start to post questions either for her live event as well as for the group event. If you're not already signed up, join the YouTube channel at Dr. Jason Loken ND, sign up to the inspirehealthpodcast.com and learn about all of the different stuff that we're doing. The podcast is only through the inspirehealthpodcast.com, but we do all of the live events and the after shows and the group meetings are all just on the YouTube channel at Dr. Jason Loken ND. So make sure you subscribe to that channel so that you get all of that content as well. Now, I'd also like to thank our new sponsor, and I am always on the lookout for really cool new companies that I think are doing some really amazing work. And one of the companies that I've been looking into over the last bit is something called C60. And this specific company called C60 Purple Power. So if you haven't heard of C60, you got to check it out. Essentially what C60 is it is 60 carbons forming this sort of soccer ball like sphere that is an incredibly powerful free radical sponge, and literally hundreds fold higher than conventional antioxidants. So it is like the absolute pretty much most powerful antioxidant that you can get. And as most of you are aware at this point, is that free radical damage is at the cornerstone of chronic illness. It literally goes hand in hand with inflammation, and those things start a cascade of events that create major health problems down the road. So personally, I'm always looking at trying to balance my oxidative load with my antioxidant support. So when I came across C60, I was really impressed with the literature that they've got. And in different episodes, I'll go through some of those studies and we'll break it down. And if you're aware of how powerful and how important certain antioxidants are to our overall health, I mean, the literature is boundless. There's tons of information on it. And if you live in this world, you are being exposed to way more free radical stress than what you normally should be put through. And so we need to counteract that. So having powerful antioxidants is another no-brainer in my mind. It's something that we should all be incorporating to some point to mitigate the general stresses of life. You think about the stuff that's in our foods and in our water and in our air that we breathe, the stress that people go through, all of those things create oxidative stress on the body. So you need something to mitigate that. Now, the things that I specifically like about C60 Purple Power is when I'm looking at certain companies, I'm looking for certain things. When it comes to a product like this, there's sort of three key things that I really like about this specific brand. First of all, is that they're manufactured in the US in an FDA compliant GMP certified facility. So this is really important. It's nice to know that things aren't being outsourced to China or somewhere else and you're getting a lower quality product. So that's number one. The second thing is that the C60 is in an oil base. And so if you're going to be in an oil base, I want it to be in a quality oil. So the oils that they use are avocado oil, olive oil, and MCT oil, all of three of my favorite oils. And if you're going to use an oil, it should be organic. And these are 100% certified organic. So that was two. Already they're getting a lot of checks on my list. And then the third thing that I think is also incredibly important is that they are third-party lab tested for concentration and bioavailability. And this company, C60 Purple Power, absolutely is. So those three things tell me that what you're getting is incredibly powerful and you're going to get what they tell you is in their bottle. So check them out. Click the link below in the show notes or in the YouTube notes, and it will have a link directly to see Purple Power where you will get a discount on your order. All right, everybody, get ready for the episode with Lynne McTaggart, and I look forward to seeing you at the roundtable discussion with everybody, as well as Lynn's live event. So make sure you send me questions that you would like me to ask her for anything that specifically comes up as you listen to the episode. Talk to you soon.
Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast and back as we continue on with our series on science, mysticism, and beyond, humanity's next phase of evolution. And we are so excited to have Lynne McTaggart with us today. So many of you probably know, but Lynn is one of the central voices in the new consciousness movement. She's the award-winning author of 7 books, including worldwide bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and her latest book, The Power of 8. She's also the architect of the Intention Experiment, a worldwide global laboratory testing the power of thought to change the world. And Lynn has been probably one of my personal favorite authors for probably about the last 20 years. So Lynn, what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh, it's great to be here with you. Thanks so much.
I'm so glad that you get to kind of round out this series in many ways, because I feel like your work has been, I mean, you've been an avatar in this area for so long. And I so appreciate and respect people that kind of go outside of what is just known conventionally and sort of keep stretching the human potential. So I think your work has been absolutely instrumental in that. And I mean, all of these books, it's like The Field. I think I read The Field back, gosh, like 20 years ago. I think it was in my 4th year of naturopathic medicine when that one came out. I think you brought that book out. I think it came in like 2001 or something like that. Is that correct? Yeah. This book too, like great. I think any healthcare practitioner, I think need to look at that book. And it was also one of those ones that has been validated over and over again by many other authors in different ways too. A lot of the stuff that you talked about really early on. That's the Intention Experiment. So you can tell, I've been following Lynn's work for a while. And The Power of 8, which I kind of want to get into a little bit more today, that's your most recent book. And I particularly have a patient who is super excited about this episode because she's actually done
the Power of Eight, and she's actually done I think she's done a course with you too. And so she's actually found that really absolutely transformed her life. So I'm excited to get into some of that as well.
Great. That's so good.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So maybe just to start off, I would like to know a little bit about just how did you particularly become interested in intention and just becoming aware of how individually and collectively powerful we are by just where we choose to focus our intent. How did that all start to develop for you?
Well, it all started with researching for my book, The Field. And that started because I edit a magazine called What Doctors Don't Tell You, and I've been doing that for 31 years in some form. It was a newsletter, now it's a magazine. And in the course of doing that, I kept coming across very good studies of things like acupuncture and spiritual healing in particular. And I kept thinking to myself, well, if you can take a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I wanted to investigate that. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about, are we talking about human energy fields, which is what I thought. And I also thought, well, the way to do this is to talk to some frontier scientists who are doing work in consciousness research. But at that point, I was just interested in how come we can do this sort of stuff and how come something like acupuncture can work. And so I started talking to these physicists and frontier biologists, et cetera, not expecting to find what I ended up finding. And what I ended up finding was that each of them were on the verge of describing a new science, a completely new view of the world that demonstrated that we're far grander than we've been told. We have much more capacity than we've been told, and that our current paradigm allows. Our current paradigm really derives from the work of Isaac Newton more than 300 years ago and the work of Charles Darwin.
Mhm.
And both have described a very arid place of separate entities, very well-behaved entities operating according to fixed laws in time and space. And these guys, these frontier scientists I was talking to when I was researching, were describing something very different. They were showing that we are all intrinsically connected. Lots of people in the new age say, oh yeah, we're all connected. Well, this was evident in our subatomic particles. The stuff they were telling me was hard science, but demonstrating the miraculous. So a bit of unfinished business came about with that research, which was the whole idea that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. And so the journalist in me wanted to pursue that further. I kept thinking to myself, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a very subtle effect, like moving a quantum particle? Or are we talking about curing cancer? Are we talking about leaping up the top of buildings? How far can we take that? And that really was the reason why I set up the intention experiment, because I wanted to delve into the science of intention, but I also wanted it to be an invitation to invite my readers around the globe to take part in these experiments. Because I'd figured by then the field was in about 30 languages and I knew a lot of scientists. So I thought, well, I've got a lot of readers and I know all these scientists. So if I put them together, I'm gonna have the biggest global laboratory in the world to test this out. And that's what we did. And so it was testing these big groups of people, sending attention to a well-controlled study. That was the idea of the intention experiment. And it just grew from there. And then by accident, just in the whole idea of scaling down these groups of intenders to a small group, that we started doing the work that became the Power of Eight. So it kind of all came about because of, I suppose, intellectual curiosity. And I seem to have made a career out of pursuing my own enthusiasms.
I think that's the best career you can make when you start to get to explore your own enthusiasms.
It makes me, that's the whole idea of even this podcast. It's all around inspired action. It's like when you get inspired, it's like you can't, it's sort of that different feeling from motivation. Motivation, I feel like you're trying to push the rock up the mountain. Inspired action is like you're getting drawn up the mountain. You can't really help but go up that way. So I think that's amazing. And you brought up a couple points there around even questioning like how far can we go with it. It does open up, because I mean I've read lots of different things, and I mean even practiced lots of different things too around the work that you've done with intention, even looking at stuff like telepathy and remote viewing. And I mean there's a lot of these things that we generally consider very sort of out there esoteric, but I feel like they very much are within the realms of possibilities. And from what you everything that you've looked at, what do you feel is sort of possible? Where do you feel like we are capable of moving to?
That's such a great question. Well, first of all, we are born with some extraordinary gifts. And as we grow, those gifts, we know this as children, but as we grow, those gifts are denied. Our teachers tell us that's impossible. Our parents may tell us that's impossible, and the science tells us it's impossible. And after a while, we believe them, and we believe that we are just a collection of electricity and chemical signaling. Well, we have extraordinary potential. I mean, I have seen people get up out of their wheelchairs with one 10-minute group intention. I have seen people heal any kind of illness you can imagine with a single or multiple group intentions. I've seen people heal their finances, heal their, create a new extraordinary career that has come out of nowhere. I've seen people heal fractured relationships or create new ones. There's so much that is possible with the power of our thoughts, no question. But other things you mentioned, and I wrote about them in the field, there's good scientific evidence that we can see beyond our senses, that people who are not gifted remote viewers, but just novices, can do this. We can forecast things with our minds. The work done at Princeton University was extraordinary with remote viewing. They would have a remote viewer, which could be a total novice, sitting in their lab, and give somebody else, his traveling partner, an envelope that he would pick randomly. And the remote viewer oftentimes would have to draw and describe where his partner was going before he even picked up the envelope. They'd always keep secrecy to the remote viewer about where his partner was going, but sometimes he had to draw and describe where his partner was going before he picked up the envelope. Nevertheless, 2/3 of their studies on remote viewing showed the accuracy in drawing and describing where a traveling partner would go. And that is extraordinary. And other groups like Stanford Research Institute, also do these amazing remote viewing studies, just giving people map coordinates and saying, tell us what's at that place. So we have that ability. We have extraordinary abilities, precognitive abilities. Rupert Sheldrake, the British biologist, put an ad in the paper after 9/11 asking for anybody who dreamed in advance. And he had hundreds of replies of people who had dreams of airplanes flying into buildings and burning buildings. Wasn't always in New York, although some were, and were very, very vivid. Sometimes it was, in Philadelphia, if they lived in Philadelphia. Nevertheless, it was exactly what happened, essentially. And we can forecast. We can pick up the thoughts of others. I do that in my classes all the time. I have people picking up the thoughts of other people. We have the ability to use all of these extra senses, besides our 5 senses, to live in the world. But I think the most powerful of all, of course, is the fact that our thoughts are not only things, but things that affect other things. And I've done, with my intention experiments, we've run 36 to date. 32 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. Everything from trying to make seeds grow faster. And these were well-controlled studies analyzed by credible scientists at prestigious universities. We've made seeds grow faster. We've purified water by a pH or two. We've run multiple experiments like that. We've done about 8 experiments trying to lower violence in war-torn areas, and we've even cured someone of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So once you start getting into those numbers, it starts getting pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just think it's fascinating to see just what is the human potential? I mean, that's a big thing that inspires me, is just constantly on the lookout to explore it and to like practice them. I feel like also you kind of have to practice these things to then have a different awareness about them. Otherwise, you're reading it and it's intellectual as opposed to sort of experiential. You know, you sometimes have to go to, like a workshop or a retreat like you're doing, or, or we've been to ones with like Greg Braden and stuff before too. It's like, it's a different experience to actually be there. Maybe we can break down a little bit about intention. So for people that kind of think, well, how the heck does that? How does something that seems like it's in here actually affect something physical? How does intention actually work? And that might sort of open up into what is the field and the 0 point field that you've spoken about?
Okay. Well, we know that our thoughts are not locked inside our heads, that mind does not equal brain. There were some extraordinary studies done way back in the 60s involving some nasty little studies involving rats. And these were done by 2 neuroscientists, one of whom, the late Dr. Carl Pribram, was working as a young neuroscientist. And what they did was they took a batch of rats and they taught them a very complex maze. And then they proceeded to destroy these rats' brains one by one with, horror of horrors, this Dr. Carl Lashley's wife's curling iron. I mean, it just horrible. But these were the days before animal rights.
Mm-hmm.
And so they removed and removed and removed these poor rats' brains. And what they discovered is that this definitely affected their motor skills, and they would staggering along. But no matter how much rat brain they removed, the rats remembered the run. And so Pribram and Lashley basically had to conclude there was no precise address where a memory was stored, that somehow it was distributed and probably outside the brain, because they had removed nearly all of this rat brain. So Pribram had to really rethink his ideas, and he came to the conclusion that the brain is much more like a antenna receiver. It picks up information, but that information is out there in the field. It is not in here. And that we transmit as well. And in terms of transmitting, while it's difficult to say exactly what the transmitter does and is, we have some good evidence. And that is another scientist, the late, and all of these scientists who were these geniuses who developed all of this, many of them have passed on. But the late Fritz Albert Popp discovered that the human body in its DNA emits a tiny current of light. And this light is a signaling system to the rest of the body. It's a global signaler. So if you put, for instance, medicine in one part of your body, say your hand, it will change the light emissions there, but it'll also change them everywhere else. And that's essentially instantaneously. So we know that there's a global signaling mechanism going on. But what he also discovered in his studies, and people after him have discovered, is that these light emissions are a communication mechanism with the outside world. So that he's found that with animals and people, they send out light and that light comes back to them synchronicitously. So we are signaling, we're having a conversation right now, a conversation of light as well as a conversation of voice. Now, what subsequent scientists have discovered, like Dr. Gary Schwartz, a noted psychologist at the University of Arizona, with whom I've done a number of intention experiments. He has special equipment that usually photographs faint light in outer space, and he has used it to measure and photograph this tiny biological light. So he's measured, and also the equipment enables him to count these photons, photon by photon.
Wow.
So these light emissions, which are a tiny stream of photons, he can count and note any changes. And what he's done is asked healers to put their hands inside this equipment and then to start sending healing to someone, a thought of sending healing to someone. And what happens is the light stream massively changes. And you can not only see it, but there is a giant increase in those light emissions when they are sending healing. So it looks like, and we also know from other studies, there's an increase of magnetic energy. There is oftentimes an increase of electromagnetic energy, but that stuff dissipates over space. When you're talking about quantum realm and non-locality, it doesn't dissipate. So there's another element in here. And it looks like, because we've done studies with our intention experiment, where I've been sitting there in front of an audience of people in Australia, and we've sent intention to a batch of seeds sitting in Tucson, Arizona, and had an effect, 8,000 miles away. And also one of those studies, we just had a picture, just photo of the seeds. It wasn't the seeds themselves. We were just showing people a symbolic representation of those seeds, and yet we had an effect. That is a quantum effect. So we have some indications that our thoughts are trespassers, going out and affecting people and things, and also that we do create a kind of psychic internet when we're interacting with things that can transverse any distance.
When and I remember talking a while back with like Dr. Amit Goswami and Dr. Irvin Laszlo and some of those guys, and we had a conversation around some of that too, and in different sort of language around some of it, but very much the same sort of idea. And also they've seen this stuff happen over and over again. One thing I'm always curious about is, how do we literally like supercharge our intentions? So because it's sort of this realm where it's like it's not always A plus B equals C all the time. So how does what's involved with making the intention more powerful? So I'm assuming, like, even when you were looking at different healers, you're going to see some healers that are going to probably emit a larger increase in the photons versus maybe other healers. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what is involved to sort of amplify the effects of it? Or makes me think of like the movie The Secret, when that came out, and it sort of brought lots of awareness around stuff, but I feel like it didn't really give all of the pieces and sort of watered it down in some ways, but it brought a lot of awareness to it. And so how does someone actually take it from that intending part, where then they're more likely to open up the possibilities within that field for that to actually manifest in their physical reality?
Okay, well, everybody has a slightly different way of doing it. And the good news is there's a lot of different ways to heal. There's not one way to heal. Lots of different people do it slightly differently, and it still works. What I usually find generally with healers is those who get themselves out of the way, who realize that, they're not the water, they're just the hose, they're just the conduit. They tend to work better, but some do all kinds of preparation and priming. What I have found with my group intention work is the big key factor here is a group. And the other thing is, so that the whole group is holding the intention. And this I've been working on since 2008 with the first Power of 8 groups. And I found that there's that element. A group seems to somehow be the secret sauce. And I think that's because people enter into a state of oneness, which is the real key element. Because one thing we didn't talk about was when we talk about intention, et cetera, and where these thoughts sit, Well, we are all part of a giant quantum energy field that I call the field, the 0 point field, is what scientists call it. And they know um, that subatomic particles, the very tiniest entities of our being and everything else, aren't a little particle at all. They're actually a vibrating packet of energy. And they trade energy back and forth like an endless game of tennis. And in the process, a little extra charge, a virtual particle, gets created and then disappears back into the field. So this little energetic tango carries on and creates an enormous amount of energy and essentially is sitting there like a supercharged backdrop in outer space. So we're part of that, but it also seems to be, many scientists now believe, a mothership of all information, because two things: subatomic particles, when they bump into each other, take on each other's information, and they have an infinite capacity for that. And if you took the entire Library of Congress and wanted to put it on to a subatomic wave, essentially, you could, into the 0 point field, let's say, you could fit it onto a sugar cube. So it's that kind of energy density of information that is dense and sitting out there in the field. So what it is likely that we do is act like an antenna. We're like a television set picking up information and also broadcasting. So we're a television set and a television station all at the same time. So the other thing I want to say about healing is what I have noticed, which is with the groups, as I say, they enter a space of oneness. And many over and over again who have these miraculous healings that I see with power bait groups do so after they talk about um, feeling this overwhelming love, this overwhelming sense of oneness. And I'll talk about some of the studies we've done with groups that demonstrate that they are not just, this isn't just an imagining, they are entering into a state of oneness. The parts of their bodies that make them feel separate are dialed way down. But I wanted to also address another really key point that I've found always works is, or most of the time works, is telling the universe exactly what you want. One of the big mistakes people always seem to make with intention is not letting the universe know what they want. They'll say something very general, like, I want world peace, or I want to be happy, I want to be rich, when they really want something very specific. They don't necessarily need to be rich. They need to have $21,000 to buy that car, or they need $15,000 to put their kid through school, or something like that. Don't necessarily need to win the lottery. So one of the things I always teach is tell the universe exactly what you want and need. And if it's $21,030, that's what you ask for. So it's being really specific. And the intention experiments with of mine, that have not worked, which has just been a handful of them, either have had a technical problem or we've been too general, like sending love to water. Water didn't work at all. When we said we want to move this by a full pH, it did work.
That's such an important point, and that was one of the questions I had on there was, for intention to really work, does it need to have that focus sort of parameters around it, or is it good enough to just sort of sit in a state of sort of love and appreciation, and that in itself you can see measurable changes? That was one of the questions I was really wondering about, because it does, it sort of comes down to, can you just, because there's a lot of stuff around, say, and I still think they're a good intent around creating like a global meditation or something, but sometimes it's just the feeling of conjuring up that sensation of love and appreciation around stuff. So, and the reason I'm mentioning this is, like, a book that I wrote years back was called Letters That Move the World: Intentional Acts of Gratitude. And it was around
basically people writing letters genuinely from the heart to share with like sort of heroes in their life. So, and that was an acronym for how experiences reflect on others. But to genuinely connect to that feeling, and then from that feeling, share those letters and sort of create this kind of a ripple effect within a set period of time. So people are kind of experiencing it all around the same time. Genuine letters of appreciation. But the focus on that was really to connect to that person and let the overwhelming feeling of appreciation generally well up inside them and then share that. But I'm just trying to think like what ultimately creates the biggest impact? Is that enough? Or then can you take that and then almost like a laser beam kind of fine tune it somehow so that it becomes even more impactful?
Well, what we found is this. Many studies have been done about meditation. And when we went to look at the power of eight to see why it was working so well, I worked with a team of neuroscientists at Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world, one of the most prestigious, and they've got a great neuroscience department. They were really interested in the power of eight groups. So they put their group at my disposal. So we got together 7 groups of student volunteers, and we put them in power of eight groups. Now, these were people who hadn't even meditated before in the main. And we had an EEG cap on one member of the senders all the time. And we had them sending intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And we did this over each of the groups, measuring them. And the neuroscientist in charge, Dr. Stephanie Sullivan, was really surprised, as was I, because I thought we were going to see a very similar brainwave pattern to meditation. But it was nothing like meditation. Meditation has, an increase of like alpha and delta waves, the slow brain waves. Your brain slows down, but there's still very much a registration of self. With ours, all the parts of the brain that are involved in making us feel separate, helping us to navigate through space. That's the parietal lobes that sit right here. They help us determine what's me, what's not me. And they were turned way down. So were parts of the brain, like the right parts of the right frontal lobes. Some of the parts involved in worry, doubt, negativity, they were dialed down too. And so what we saw were brainwave signatures almost identical to those done by the University of Pennsylvania on Buddhist monks doing ecstatic prayer in the midst of ecstatic prayer, or Sufi masters in the midst of chanting. So what we were recognizing very quickly, people enter into a state of ecstatic oneness. And yet these were, as I say, total novices, never did this before, didn't require years of practice and hours of priming. All they needed was a group and a common intention, and they were transported into the miraculous. So I think that is the real secret sauce, is the power of group intention. It moves you away from that focus on the self into this feeling of oneness. We get to experience the field for the first time in many cases.
I think it's beautiful too. So then with intention, when you have more and more people, when you have larger groups, is the power of the intent increase? Or even at a group of say like 8 people, is it sort of the same type of thing? Or is it the more people that can be a part of it, the better?
Size doesn't matter. I mean, we actually tested that, because that seed experiment I was talking about, one of the early experiments we did, I ran it for the first time in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of 700. I ran it again with University of Arizona. We ran it each time, where we had 4 sets of seeds. We randomly chose one set. We didn't tell the scientists what seeds we were sending intention to. We told them we were done. That was their signal to plant the seeds and measure them 5 days later. And it was only after they measured them that we would unblind the study and tell them which ones we sent intention to. So we ran it with this group of 700 in Sydney, Australia. We ran it with a group of just 100 in Rhinebeck, New York. about 600 in South Carolina, an audience of about 500 in LA, an audience of 100 or so in Dallas, and then thousands of people over the internet. So we had totally different size groups, and we got very similar results every single time. The seed scent intention grew significantly higher than controls, except for one batch, which was even more than significantly, they grew about twice as high. That was a group of experienced healing touch practitioners. That was the South Carolina group. And so we started thinking probably experience matters, but size doesn't.
Wonderful. Um, and then what exactly takes place then in, say, a group of 8? Because I think this is a really important thing that people should start to find their groups of 8. I mean, again, like you got to read the book and then you kind of get the whole picture of it, or do the course with you. But what takes place in a group of 8 then? How does that sort of, when they're doing a focused intent, is it, do they pick one person at a time? Everybody spends, how much time do they generally have to spend to start to have an effect? How does that kind of work?
Okay. Well, as you say, in my book and in my courses, I teach actually 13 keys of intention mastery, or if they're taking a foundation course with me, seven real key essentials. But what they basically do is get together in a group, formulate an intention together, and hold that just for 10 minutes, do some breathing together and things like that. And there are a variety of keys, the way to focus, the way to get into a heart state, etc. And the focus is really important because people, first of all, their minds can wander. And secondly, they aren't specific enough. So intention in my book is really an intention, as I practice it and teach it, is about a really focused mind and a focused heart. So instead of, meditation is often about clearing your mind of anything and just being. Intention is quite the opposite. It's a very focused state. And it's a focused state using your 5 senses. So I have found, now we started doing this just as an arbitrary thing with our first intention experiment. I talked to Dr. Gary Schwartz. He was the scientist. We've worked with many scientists, but he was doing some of the early ones with me. And we decided that some of our audience might have never meditated before. So holding an intention for 10 minutes might be a big deal for them. So we thought 10 minutes, that's about it. So we just decided it that way, and the experiment worked. And then we did some more with 10 minutes, and the experiment continued to work. So I then decided, when we started doing Power of 8 groups, let's just make it 10 minutes. But remember, I want to make it clear too that when we talk about a group intention, there is no magic number that's ideal. Power of 8 came about because I was trying to figure out how to bring down these numbers, these big intention experiments, and to do them in a workshop. How do I scale this down? So I was kicking this around with my husband one day, Brian, who's also a journalist. And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And because he's such a good headline writer, he said, I love it, the power of 8. But I just plucked it out of the air. Now, a lot of people know that 8 has, it has a special meaning to the Chinese. It's a lucky number. It's a sideways infinity sign. So, and it has a lot of sacred geometry implication about it. But a small group intention can work with 5. It can work with 12. 8 is a kind of Goldilocks number. It's not too big, it's not too little. So that's really how it came about. But it's about the group meeting. And as I say, when we started doing Power of 8 groups, because in that first workshop, I thought it was going to be just a nice little feel good effect, like getting somebody to massage your back a little bit. But when we did it that first day, and we put people into groups, they sent their intention, we had them come back for the second day of the workshop, and then asked all of the people who got intention to come up on stage and report if they had any change, figuring they'd say, yeah, I felt a little relaxed. Well, they came up and said things like this: I have migraines and my head was clear for the first time in months. I have terrible digestive gut problems and my gut is normal today. I have terrible limp from bad arthritis and I'm walking normally. And one woman even said, I have cataracts and I feel like I'm 80% better now. So we were blown away, disbelieving, thinking it was placebo effect, until I kept doing it over and over and over again. And I did for years, in fact, before I wrote the book, because it was pretty frightening to me and I really wanted to understand it. It took me 10 years to publish that book from the first intention groups.
Wow. That kind of answers one of the questions I had too, to some point, but I'm wondering if you have any more background on that. The idea that in intending alone can sort of transform the physical body, or does it happen where when people start to intend and change their focus, that also causes them to then make different adjustments in their lifestyle and whatnot too, because they're literally almost moving into a different field to some point. So can it affect the physical body without any other changes in their life? Or do you find it sort of pairs together with, as they're intending something, that as they're doing that and they're changing their thoughts and their feelings and where their focus is, that then they start to actually implement different changes in their physical world as well, like whether they exercise different, they eat different, like all of those types of things as well. I'm just curious to see what plays over and how much of that.
Sure. Well, first of all, this is one reason why it works so well in the group, because you do an intention with a group, and in a little way, it's like making a vow to make changes. Now, if you say, I want to lose 10 pounds, and you still continue to eat a very high carb processed diet, you're not going to lose the weight. I mean, action does follow thought, and that is an important part of it too. But when you make a statement, particularly when you make a public statement, my intention, and it becomes our intention in the group, a whole bunch of things happen, I think. So yes, it is making that vow. It is the power of intention. It is the group effect. You're sitting there, this whole group is sending love to you, an intention for you, selfless. And oftentimes, this is a group that you may not have even physically met. In my courses, I put people into virtual groups. Many of them meet for years and they never actually physically meet, but these are their best friends, their intention buddies, and they do this work together. Another big piece that we haven't really talked about is the power of altruism. Altruism is a healer for the person being altruistic. It's a bulletproof vest, because if you look at the science of altruism, that was what I was wondering, trying to figure out, why do these intention groups work so well? So I was looking at every angle. And when you look at the science of altruism, people who do things for other people live longer, happier, healthier lives. If you're sick with something and you help other people with the same illness, you're more likely to heal. If you volunteer for something, you have it's something like you have 2/3 less chance of dying. I mean, there are amazing stats around altruism. And one of the great things about a Power of 8 group is, assuming there are 8 in the group, only 1/8 of the time they're intending for you. They're intending for the rest of the group at the other times. And I have seen over and over and over again, when people get off of themselves, that is oftentimes the big instrument of change. So I have people in my master class who get stuck, and it happens over and over again. Or they're, not believing or whatever. And I will usually say to them, get off of yourself. I mean, a classic example was a woman called Andy Spiros, who was um, stuck trying to get a new job, going through a divorce, two young kids, needed the money, couldn't find anything. And she was a talented coach and a talented marketer and had owned a gift store too. So she had all of this experience and was a young woman, couldn't get anything. So I finally said, Andy, get off of yourself. So I said, look, why don't you focus on this young boy that I had told my then masterclass about, who had tried to commit suicide. 15-year-old, broke up with his first serious girlfriend, threw himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. So the whole masterclass then started focusing on Luke for 3 successive Sundays. And his parents kept a running commentary of what was happening to Luke when we sent, right after we sent intentions. So for me, it was really interesting to see. And upshot is Luke, whom they didn't think was even going to live, got out of the hospital in record time. I saw his parents about a year ago, and they showed me a picture of him. He's a normal 18-year-old now. So that was amazing. But more amazing what happened to Andy, because Andy, the moment she focused on Luke, within days, she got a call out of nowhere from somebody she didn't even know, offering her a dream job. So that has happened over and over and over again. Now, you asked too about, does somebody does it result in somebody changing their behavior? Well, I'll think about, there is a woman, Shelley, in my last masterclass that just finished. We have another one that has just started. I run a year-long course. My big course is a year-long. And last year's masterclass, which finished up in January, had a woman in it called Shelley who had a terrible sugar addiction, so bad that she woke up in the middle of the night binging all the time. And that would keep her up. So she'd sleep all morning and not get up till the afternoon, which was affecting her marriage and everything else. So everybody intended for her to get off of sugar. Not only did she stop having sugar, but that created a cascade of better behavior. She started meditating, she started exercising, she started going for lovely walks with her husband, and her marriage got renewed. And she said, thanks to her group, this is one of the best times of her life. So we see that all the time, that people start an intention, have to follow through. And I've seen it with other people where working in the group, sometimes with people with health challenges, I'll suggest that they do an intention to find the right therapy for them, or the right therapist or practitioner. And they'll do that, and it redoubles their efforts to get well, because they've told the group they want this. So that making a vow, speaking about it publicly, is also a motivator.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that sort of that even in old goal setting, it's around the accountability part that kind of anchors you to it a little bit more. I think that's such a neat one too, around about getting off your own back. I feel like so much we've been kind of conditioned to think that everything needs to be a lot of like time and energy and work to make things happen. And a lot of it, the magic really seems to happen when there's that sort of surrender to the process a little bit more, or like you say, get off your own back, focus on somebody else. And then all of that other stuff that's kind of blocking it just kind of drifts away because there's no focus on it anymore. So I know in our life, whenever we've kind of done that, anything that we've struggled more with, it's because we're over kind of analyzing it or wondering about it, and it gets tied up with a lot of different emotions. And it's usually the stuff that you don't think actually that much about, that shows up very easily because there's no real attachment to it, so to speak.
Yeah, and there is just something simple about altruism, doing something for someone else. We are so conditioned, and we have been so conditioned for many decades now, to be focused on ourselves, self-help, self-help. just constant self-betterment, self, me. And that focus, I think, can be very dangerous after a while. It is just, an obsession with the self and improvement, self-improvement. And over and over again, I see people after one power of eight group. I mean, their life changes when they are the sender. I have just as many healing stories about people when they've been the sender as the receiver. I mean, my favorite one is a guy called Wes Chapman, who was a Vietnam vet. He had a bright future studying biochemistry, and he was in college when he was called up to serve at during the last year of the Vietnam War, when there were no more student deferments. So he went, it was so traumatic for him. He dropped out of college, so he never finished. And his life just went in a terrible downward spiral. He even lost the love of his life. He met his second wife, but that didn't last that long because she had developed a fast-growing cancer, and he lost her, had terrible bills to pay. Life just sucked for him, basically. So by the time I met him, he had given up. It was hard for him to even get up in the morning and do anything for himself. And he was avoiding people. He was just so depressed. So I set up a group, a Power Bait group out of a church, Mile High Church in Denver. And this was just an exploratory group. This was the first time they met. And I just told him what to do. And he was going to put himself forward, but he didn't, because there was a woman in the group with a stage 4 cancer. So he felt she was more deserving. So he sent this intention to her like everybody else. And he had these extraordinary experiences that many people in both my intention experiments and my Power Bait groups report, which was super heightened senses. When he woke up the next day, super heightened senses, a sense of extraordinary well-being that he hadn't felt for years, a sense of wanting to connect with other people he hadn't felt for years. And then finally, the next night, he had this amazing dream where he was back at his college campus and he met his 19-year-old self. And here he was, 65 now. And the 19-year-old self somehow communicated to him, it's okay, there's still time. And he woke up and was a completely changed person. I mean, he was suddenly engaged. He started going for power walks and lifting weights. He started writing. He started joining courses. He reaffirmed his connection with his church and started doing Power Bait groups with his church. And it was just amazing. His life was saved after one Power Bait group, one act of altruism.
That's amazing. I love that it was his older teenage self that had the words of wisdom for him.
I know. It's so
I think
great.
that's fascinating. I'm going to be respectful of your time here too, Lynn. I have one last question just to kind of fine tune the intention. But when people are in the group and they are intending and it's specific, so say they're picturing someone that wants to lose specifically 10 pounds, for example, keeping it simple. Are they then picturing in their head, are they picturing that person then already there? Like, are they picturing what that person's going to look like at 10 pounds, how they're going to be enjoying their life at that, what they're sort of all the things that are going to create the positive pieces? Or are they picturing like it coming down on the scale, the numbers dropping down? Is there a specific sort of thing that makes it, and do they need to connect to a certain feeling state in the process of the intention?
Well, I mean, they need to connect to their hearts. And as I say, there's a whole process that we go through. They can visualize the process, or they can visualize the outcome. I mean, oftentimes the outcome is very, very powerful, particularly in illnesses. When you want to have an outcome of. But I find that people have the most extraordinary visualizations, and we don't tell people don't. This is not about clearing your head. It's about focusing.
Right.
And we have all kinds of visualizations of healing, and with Power of Eight group members, and that's all fine. It seems to, and oftentimes the group has a similar visualization. It becomes one great big hypermind. I have many instances where people have reported, I think there was one group where they were focusing on somebody's spine getting better, and they all imagined, so many of them imagined the spine being pulled out of her body and infused with light. So we get all kinds of things like that. But as I say, it's not a mind state. It might be a mind that formulates the intention. It's a heart state.
Yeah, well said. Lynn, thank you so much. Where can people learn more about the work that you're doing? Where can we send them? You've got online courses that are running, you've got lots of books. Where's the best place for people to go learn more about your work?
Sure. Thank you so much. They can find out more at lynnmctaggart.com. And we have some upcoming courses. We have an advanced intention course that will be happening this spring. We have for practitioners, Become a Better Healer through the Power of Eight. I find that very interesting about thought and intention when it comes to being a practitioner. Sometimes I'm absolutely astonished by the thoughts and the words that otherwise very, very intelligent alternative practitioners use, or even conventional doctors and nurses, and don't realize that that is affecting their patients. So I do a course on that. I'm starting a new course on living the new science.
I saw that recently, yeah.
That will be coming up. And I have podcasts and written courses, et cetera, et cetera. So all is on lynnmctaggart.com. Plus, we'll be announcing our next intention experiment soon too.
Oh, exciting. I will make sure I've got all those links in the show notes for everybody to check everything out. And yes, I think that ultimately, especially where we are right at the moment, I really do feel like this kind of work is the most important stuff that we can all be doing right now. I really do. I know that firsthand, it's been the most important stuff that my wife and I have done that have made the biggest catalyst for changes in our life. And very much appreciate you in the world, Lynn, and so much of the work that you've done. I think it's wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight to be with you.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.